Hi, I'm Peter Drury, and I'm honored to serve as Chief Strategy Officer for Wellspring Family Services. And today I'm just thrilled to get to have a conversation with the revered and respected Dr. Ben Danielson, who for many years was the director of the Odessa Brown Children's Clinic in Seattle and is a highly respected pediatrician and thought leader in our community. So Ben, you have a long history with Wellspring, way longer than mine. So I would love to hear kind of where this started and why Wellspring Family Services is needed in our community and how you've been connected.
Yeah, that love affair has gone many, many years now, into decades. And for me, as a practicing pediatrician, as someone who's been connected to the Central District in South Seattle, as someone who just sees these amazing families coming through the clinic for decades, the strong realization comes to you almost right away that there are so many layers to wellness. Right? There are so many pieces that go into feeling well, to having the opportunity to feel well, to have the space, the basic needs, and the resources. And I mean that just at the very, very fundamental level in order to be well. I can do everything great as a pediatrician. I could write, great medical diagnoses and things. And yet I know from a community perspective, from a lived experience perspective, you can't stay well unless there's a wellspring in your life.
Oh, that's great. Well, the history behind the agency has always been around responding to people in crisis. We think of it today very precisely around family homelessness, kind of children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness. But this history going back to 1892 is just from the very beginnings of a city where wealth was expanding quickly, people were moving here, and already there were people on the margins who weren't being served. And so this story, it's not a new story in Seattle. We recognize it today in a highly scaled version, but the history's always been responding in crisis. And I'm wondering, when you've worked with children and youth and families in crisis, and the kinds of crises that lead to homelessness, what are kind of top of mind for you as a practitioner about what those families truly need?
It's interesting listening, and we've been friends for a while, and so I hear your question, and so many thoughts go through my head. One is, if we're talking 100 years of this same cycle happening, we might need a different word than crisis, right? Because crisis speaks to some momentary, transitory thing, and perhaps that's true for people's lives. But I think for a lot of the families at both Wellspring and I've had the privilege of working with, I don't even know if they call it crisis, because they recognize that these are cycles that just keep happening to them societally. And it speaks for the ongoing, continuing need for spaces like Wellspring, and I guess the need for Wellspring to evolve, to be dynamic, to be nimble, to meet people. I'm sorry for that hackneyed term, but meet them where they are, and be ready to listen, learn, and serve. And that will just be something that is a part of our society now and tomorrow. We have too many families left behind by the way our systems are set up, the way our society creates super opportunity for some and disadvantage for others. And we need spaces like Wellspring to respond to that.
Thank you for that wisdom. I really take that correction in stride around crisis. You're right. I mean, these are trends and even traditions, dare I say, right, of oppression and exclusion and poverty that we're dealing with, and not simply momentary crisis. So thank you for that. The Early Learning Center in particular, which is the only dedicated early learning center for children experiencing homelessness, you have a long relationship there. Bavette Urvis, the director, has been there for over 30 years, a very close relationship. What are your thoughts about, the children being served in the years before they're in school, who quite frankly are probably getting kicked out of other preschools, or they aren't welcome in the first place, or no one can afford them? And Bavette and that team do something, I think, that's fairly miraculous there. And any reflections on the Early Learning Center and all the years you've been connected?
First, is it just me, but is it impossible not to smile when you hear the name Bavette? I just, there is something so connecting, so, just Earth Mother warm about her presence, her spirit, and her energy. And I'm so pleased that spaces like Wellspring are actually accumulations of wonderful people, not just buildings or structures or policies or programs, but it's human beings connecting with other human beings. And so I just have to share my warm fuzzy about Bavette. When it comes to early learning, the truth in your words is so deep about we tolerate a society where parts of our early learning system decide whether or not someone is worthy of being in them or not. That decides based on the color of your skin how much you might be punished for the very same behavior that someone else is engaging in. Creates a real hierarchy from almost early on in the educational process, and it is important that we have spaces that say no to that, that say every child is an incredible nugget of potential energy and value and beauty and amazing disruption and just all of that beautiful energy that we all know so well. Every child, and every child deserves the spaces where they can thrive and grow and know and see themselves. When I think about the Early Learning Center, I also think inescapably about generations. Mm-hmm. There's so much of the work that happens across societies, across communities, where we try to make investments and hope for things to change in 6 months or a year or 2 years. And the reality is, with these deep cycles that affect so many parts of our communities, our work has to be on the scale of generations. And the earliest part of a generation's life is the best time to be intervening. So I think about this work that Wellspring is doing as generational investment, and so beautifully important because I don't know for you how it feels, but you are making these changes that someone else will see.
Yeah.
That someone a decade from now will notice. That some school experience down the road will be where it shows up, where that hand will be raised, where that assertive presence in a high school will lead to that opportunity in a college or wherever they're going. Yeah. You're doing things with early learning, Bavette and everyone there, in some ways that they will never see in person, but they will know in terms of impact, which is kind of beautiful.
Oh, it really is. Yeah, when you think back, like in your own life, about those experiences that were impactful, and you think back 30 years or something, like someone's having those experiences now. So,
I know there was a Bavette in my childhood. I don't know if I would name her, or she was one person or an accumulation of others, but the folks who show up in those spaces and spend their time investing in all of our kids, because these are all of our kids, they're doing amazing work.
Wow. You've thought a lot, and you've taught a lot and talked a lot and reflected a lot on resilience as a concept. I've heard you give a number of talks about resilience over the years, and I would just like to invite any reflections that you have on that term. I know you can go a lot of directions with that, but today, at this moment in history, it may be even you describe it differently than you might have a few years ago. What needs to be known about resilience in the work that we do and as it relates to the children and families we're serving?
You're so right. You're a keen observer in other people's lives. And so it's not surprising to me that you've heard me talk differently about resilience at different times. Early in my career, resilience was the capitalized, bolded, italicized, underlined. This is the most important thing, and we must celebrate it and see it and lift it up. And then I've also gone through times when I have felt like resilience has been a word that has been used to excuse us from making deeper investments in the communities around us. I don't know how else to say it. Perhaps it's that, they're resilient, so we don't need to make these extra efforts. So
right.
There's resilience there. You're going to be fine. You're the flower growing in the desert, and there's almost this admiration for suffering that can sometimes show up in that word. And so I've had that mixed relationship with the word resilience. It's funny now in these days, I think about resilience in maybe a more blended way, that resilience is this beautiful shorthand for what I think is the inherent power and beauty and possibility and potential that every human being has, and that sometimes gets kind of tamped down sometimes gets pushed aside by some of the ways our communities and society might work, but is always there. And if you just unlock it, if you just create space for it, if you just acknowledge it, then that power and that beauty kind of shows up. And because it took me so long to say that, then I love that maybe resilience is the word that captures all of that. On the other hand, I will never allow anybody to rest back on resilience as an excuse for allowing us to close our eyes to the suffering of those around us.
Yeah. You know, I mean, this is maybe a tangent, but I feel like that happens with words over time. I would call it kind of a whitewashing of words, honestly, where even a word like diversity that maybe a generation ago, 25 or 30 years ago, had a certain affirmative call to it. And then at a certain point, it'd be like, oh, wait a second, that's somebody else's tool now or something. So it's amazing. I mean, there's so much power in words and how people frame them. So if I can anchor us a little bit in just the examples of, like, you know, the people who come to Wellspring and are seeking services, and I'll invoke Bavette a little bit to say that she holds a particular gold standard for us at Wellspring, which is she wants people to have the best experience they've ever had in a social service agency. So there's something about the beauty of the building, there's something about the dignity of the space, there's something about how we treat, how we look at people and how we welcome them, and she just feels like it's got to be the best possible experience. We don't want someone to feel like, oh, I had to go to Wellspring, or that it feels tattered or torn or anything else, but instead that people feel uplifted, you know, when they encounter us. And the people I'm talking about are often, you know, it's a mom living out of a car with a child or two, right? It's a family doubled up, terrified they're going to lose their housing, right? And particularly now during the pandemic, it's folks who now have a year of rent in arrears, and they know their landlord is fighting hard, right, to have that moratorium stop. And they're going to be out, and they're going to owe a year of back rent before they can ever get in somewhere. I mean, so there's people literally experiencing homelessness out on the streets or in cars, right? But there's also people who are just scared it's going to happen to them really, really soon. Right. Can you talk to me about? I mean, you've seen and known so many families in related kinds of situations. What's the dimension of this need, and what does the world need to know about people, you know, in these conditions and situations?
I pause. I take a deep breath when you ask a question like that, because I think what's really important right now is that we actually all, individuals, as groups, as folks working with each other, as caring human beings, we are deeply reflective about where we are now, the bow wave, the ever-growing, slightly put off layers of needs that we are going to be confronted with moving forward, with the incredible onus of the cumulative trauma of stress, of worry, of uncertainty, of pain, of seeing people around you suffering, of seeing illness strike your communities more than others. We need to be very deeply thoughtful and awake about what's going on and what it portends for our very near future, and how we need to step up. I worry a little bit that there's this sort of shared fatigue, that everyone is sort of pretty easily saying, you know, I'm also tired, and this has been rough for me too, and my life has been very different. And I just want us to really remember that my fatigue, my exhaustion, might be on a very, very different scale than some of the folks that you serve, for whom life and death, the well-being of their hearts and their heads and their souls and their families, the existential, and I mean that like life-threatening risks and ordeals that have been faced, even if those are starting to go into the rearview mirror, they have packed a wallop with them. And I just have to be honest with myself and say, whatever I've faced is small compared to what others have faced. Whatever is making me tired, I need to hydrate, get a little bit of rest, and wake up right and get right into the most important work we can possibly do, which is be part of supporting the growth and the sustenance and the thriving of the communities around us. This is our investment in ourselves, in our future, in the spaces and places and people that are our children and our children's children we'll have the privilege of spending time with. So I hope there's a way for us to think deeply about what tired is for us, what traumatic exhaustion is for others, and how we can step into a different gear, find a way to really invest in the near future, especially because the load, the onus, the bow wave, the tsunami is really coming for us. You started this question with this statement about dignity, and I don't want that to pass without us just honoring that for a moment, because there are different ways in which our society could provide services, could offer specific goods, could create a learning environment. If they are bereft of a deepest attention to dignity, then their gains are going to be sacrificed. The good is going to be compromised. The possibility is going to be foreshortened, in my view. Focusing and thinking about dignity is such an important piece. That same family you talked about, maybe every other place they turn, they see that mom is treated with indignity, with judgment, with a negative attribution. And so that combination maybe of respect and respite, deep respect, showing dignity, really lifting someone into the space that they deserve to be lifted into, and respite, just a space where, when you walk through this door, you're going to be treated right and well and welcomed and celebrated and honored. And maybe sometimes we all take that for granted a little bit too much.
You started, Ben, with some comments around wellness, and I was thinking about how, insecurity, whether it's food insecurity or whether it's housing insecurity or whether it's this kind of aggregate trauma around racism and oppression and violence. I mean, there's so many kind of waves and levels we could think about this. I'm curious, when you were talking about wellness earlier, and when I think about the kinds of forces at play in the world right now, we're specifically focusing on people who are looking for housing security. There's all this other stuff that comes around that, but we have a philosophy at Wellspring that we share with other peers in our region called Housing First, where we think that let's get somebody housed before we worry about a lot of other things. I mean, they may have other things, but let's get them housing security. Can you comment, as a doctor, on the role that secure housing, secure food, a safety net of community, how that plays into someone's health and stability and back to resilience?
As a doctor, there are things that we are very aware of. Perhaps not everybody wants to acknowledge them, but the data, the experience, the accumulated knowledge and wisdom is there, both from the perspective of those who've experienced homelessness and housing insecurity, for example, and from those who've looked at it and studied it. And the truth is the truth, that you're more likely to get hospitalized as a child if you experience housing insecurity. You're more likely to lose pace in schools because you're shifting schools often, or because of interruptions in schooling. You're much more likely to have mental health concerns. And I would just put out that those are appropriate. The stress of uncertainty about housing, it should create anxiety in a child. And so these are known things. We don't have to debate or talk too much about that, because as a doctor, as a human being, we know the toll that this takes, and the protracted toll, the long-term toll that this can take on people's lives. So the work to say, let's get housing accomplished early. Let's take that deep anxiety off of the shoulders of the parents, and because we all know how much kids understand what's happening around them, off of the shoulders and minds of young people as well. And let's build from there a space that allows you to look to the future instead of worry about the moment in so many critical ways. Another word that can get whitewashed and other things too, but I think an important word is hope. I've heard you talk about hope. I reflect a lot about hope in my own work, our work at Wellspring. What are your thoughts on hope these days? It's an enormous word, even though it's one syllable and so small. It carries so much weight to me, partly because if you are working in these spaces, if you're thinking about helping and serving communities that have been oppressed, that faced generations of racism, that have had traumatic experience, that have been seen generation after generation. If you're addressing these issues, I start from a space of outrage, because I have way more faith in us as human beings than I see in evidence of us as human beings in society. And so I don't lose my faith in my fellow person, but it makes me outraged that we tolerate the spaces and things that we're tolerating today. And what that does also for me, though, is remind me that if I only speak in anger, then I may be missing something really important. So I make up words. I've talked about being lovingly angry.
I love that one.
Talking about other things that I think it's possible for us to be outraged as human beings, and also say that what we want to build is based on hope. That what we want to build is based on not just the kind of hope that's passive, like I'm going to sit back and hope that things get better. My one tiny critique of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is that I think he created this impression that the moral universe just passively arcs towards betterment, and that's the kind of hope that we can't have. We cannot be in lazy hope. We cannot sink back into the beanbag of hope and expect other people to step up and step out and do the work around us. But I do have this dynamic hope, this aggressive hope, this outraged and outrageous hope that we can see ourselves and see our own potential in helping our fellow human being, that we can see, most importantly, the amazing potential in the young people around us and learn from them, let them be our mentors and our guides, that we can build this idea that hope and joy are the directions, the spaces, the places that we are actually intentionally working hard to arc towards. I've often thought that if as a healthcare professional, I could be curing for hope, treating for joy, building that into the work of wellness, then that would truly be transformational for me as well as for others.
Great, that'd be the truth. Yeah, that would really be the true work. I love that lazy hope or that beanbag of hope. Those are super powerful ideas in terms of to avoid. I'm curious for the workers, for the staff at Wellspring, who see family after family after family, very easy over time, right? That kind of secondary trauma. And in many cases, people have their own, they have primary trauma as well, but the secondary trauma working there. What do you say to someone working on the front lines about hope? And in terms of how can you convey the conditions that can help a child or a family have hope, even if you're feeling, you might feel like this is a intractable problem, we can't get past it, but here's one more family walking in the door. How do we elevate ourselves to respond?
It is hard to see that happen over and over again, to witness that and to be present as different kinds of suffering and trauma visit again and again. My first thought in there, and I was smiling again, was because I wonder how Bavette and some of your other staff would answer this question, because I bet each of us has our own little crucible of our personal wellness that allows us to be present in that every day. For me personally, the joy that families bring, the strength that I see in them, the abilities and the possibilities, so often, almost always outnumber the traumas and the pains, that you can't help but get inspired by that. If you look into a child's eye, even in the midst of a family's trauma, you're more likely to see them expecting something better in their gaze than acquiescing to something terrible. So can we be inspired by the gaze of the young people around us? Can we be lifted up by that? Can we recognize that? And I don't mean rosy colored glasses. I don't mean ignoring the traumas and the difficulties, but I do mean that there are strengths that are happening even in those moments of terrible trauma. And let's be respectful of those. Let's honor those. Let's recognize those. I don't know, selfishly, let's feed off of those a little bit and gain some strength and space from that. I also know that if you're at Wellspring, you're making a difference. And again, another hackneyed term, another trite thing to say, but something very, very true, and I think very deeply and powerfully personally true. You're making a difference, and you're watching that other person who works next to you and shows up every day to do it and to keep doing it. You're watching them, and that's strengthening to you. You're seeing yourself be present to bring joy even in the midst of trauma. Maybe you're watching yourself sometimes find yourself laughing and smiling and reflecting, and there is something inside of you that is growing and glowing and shining because you have a privilege to be present in the lives of others, even when it's during their hardest days.
I have a question that no one would expect me to ask in a moment like this, or wouldn't kind of go into this kind of a conversation typically. But as someone who's worked in the nonprofit sector a long time and consults with lots of organizations, and I teach a bit at Seattle University, and I reflect on how kind of nonprofit organizations function. And one of the key things is, it'll sound geeky for a moment, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this because I think it's a weighty topic. We have all kinds of auditors, right? It could be a financial audit. It could be a board of directors. It could be a contract monitor in the city or the county. Lots of people with opinions or thoughts or schematics for what success really means. I'm curious what you would say to anybody who would authenticate. Is Wellspring doing its real job, right? Like, are we really doing the real work? What's your message to those people? Because you get, like I say, you get audited from all these angles. But are we doing our true work? And if you were to think about the true work of Wellspring, and if you were going to hold us to some kind of a Dr. Ben Danielson standard, not that I know you don't want to have your name on a stage, but if you were to say to us, what would truly be successful for Wellspring? What would you want people to hold us to so that we're truly accountable?
That's a great question. And I think about that in the same wonky way. In some ways, I didn't mean to say wonky, but this there are these details that go into operating an organization, an entity. And in some ways, the scrutiny on nonprofits is so disproportionately different and so intense. I mean, this might not make it into the film, but we can watch a board of directors of a hospital hand out vaccines to their favorite people, and that hospital will still function and still be there the next day. If that a lack of moral fiber, were present in some of our most cherished nonprofits, they would be vilified and expunged instantly. So I just want to acknowledge that there may be different sets of rules and tiers and expectations that we hold different organizations to. The second thing is that we have a rigor about financial accountability, and I would look forward to the day when we had the same kind of rigor around moral and ethical accountability, and it draws me into this idea of naming and focusing on equity. And so the last part of your question for me is thinking about the way I've come to understand equity as a journey, as a pathway, and a shared definition of equity that I know. The first line of it is equity is best named and described by those most impacted. So my dodge to your question is that the question you have is best answered by the people who walk through your door and are that you serve every day. If they are naming the success and the work that you're doing as valuable, as lifting up dignity, as allowing them to move along in a path that will get to better, more beautiful days, then that's success. And I don't care what any CPA has to say about it. That is success. Your beloved families and community are the best measure of your success. And so I will defer to them to answer that question. And I'll bet you have ways of asking them every week, every month, every year. And I would listen deeply to everything that is said by that. Because I think that's one of the other examples of showing equity. Equity is also the shifting of power, and taking the power out of a chatty pediatrician who thinks they have lots of cool ideas and putting it into the perspective and the lived wisdom that comes from the families that you serve. And if they are your guides, if they are your reviewers, if they are the assessors of your work, then you will never, ever go wrong. And you will be demonstrating a shift of power that is really meaningful, I think.
Thank you. I promise to take that back. I promise it. That's a powerful statement and ought to be gold standard for us. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. I know we'll come to the end of our time soon, but I was curious about, you've had such a long connection to Wellspring. You've known different families, and of course, confidentiality is this and that. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to say anything particular that you shouldn't, but I wonder if you have any particular memory or story or thought at all about, in all your decades of connection, that just comes to mind about your relationship and any family that you've known that's been served there.
I was thinking about this. This was a few weeks ago. I was just kind of formulating some thoughts and ideas, and I was thinking about this family that was from maybe one of my earlier years of connectedness to Wellspring, and it probably solidified for me this sense of just regard for the beautiful space that you create. Because I remember this family as both a mom and a very young child who I saw in clinic as, I can't think of another word besides suffering, and wearing and holding that suffering as powerfully and tragically as I can remember, feeling these decisions that this mom was making, choosing not to feed herself in order to try to feed her child, and making decisions about her own health care, and in so many ways making the sacrifices that she needed to, but doing it in a way that felt like she didn't really see a pathway out of it, that it was just, every decision was a hard decision. Everything was a sacrifice. Everything was maybe more like a step backwards. She started getting involved with Wellspring when she was eligible to go to Wellspring. And I watched these two human beings who still had so many of the same challenges start to show up for these baby checkups in just completely different ways. I hope, like, I had a tiny bit to do with it, but I know that, like, the bigger piece was feeling this sense of respect and dignity with Wellspring and a sense of community. But she's starting to show up for her well child visits, and all of a sudden she's going from this place of shut down and not really wanting to say more than a word in answer to my questions, to asking me questions, to kind of naming the things that she was doing well, instead of just the things that were going poorly. She was just like, you know what I did the other day? I got down on the ground with my baby because I wanted to see what they were going to see when they started crawling around. And I noticed these things and how this world was going to be for them. You know what I did the other day? I was thinking, I need to gradually increase the space where my baby will move around in our home, because right now it's very limited, rolling here and there, but pretty soon they're going to want to explore and grow. So I was thinking about that. It just struck me. She was thinking about that. She was thinking about hope and progress and new and something else. And she was using her mom skills, and she was naming those mom skills. And she was talking about being a good mom, really. And she was actually teaching me a few little pointers. And she just kept showing up more and more like this person who knew her future was better and that she deserved better. And that was not the first person I met at first. And I know that Wellspring had a lot to do with that. And could I enunciate the moments when a joy factor was given, or when a self-confidence piece was transferred? No, because none of us can in our lives. Yeah. But we share experiences, and over time, we learn to be stronger because of the way people regard us, as much as for the ways we regard ourselves. But then we start to see ourselves in a different light, as capable, as able, as strong, as valuable, as powerful, as good moms. And there's no better thing to feel like that you're a good mom when it's important. So I just remember that experience, and I over-described it. It was happening over the course of probably 4 months, but it was noticeable, and it was real, and it was powerful.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
Sorry, that was very long.
No. You kidding? That's stunning and worthy for, I think, our staff to hear that story, to be reminded of it, for the community around us to hear that. No, not too long at all. That's just beautiful. Well, it's a privilege. It's a pleasure. I feel honored on behalf of all my colleagues at Wellspring Family Services that I'm the person who got to sit down with you today. I feel like I sit in this seat on behalf of a lot of other people, some of them before me in time over decades, some of them kind of around me in this present time as colleagues. But there's an awful lot of love and respect for you, Dr. Ben, for history and for the present moment and also for the future. And so we wish you the best on behalf of Wellspring. We are eager to still be your partners, your friends, your co-conspirators in all the ways that we need to be on behalf of children, youth, and families who are facing homelessness. And we're just grateful to you. So thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but I'm going to look at the camera and just speak to everybody at Wellspring and everyone who loves Wellspring and knows it and has been part of that journey. We live in a society now that is deeply in need of a strong reckoning of its racial and racist past and its racist present. We see over and over again that we are struggling to learn as a society how to treat each other better, how to regard each other differently, how to span difference of opinion, of skin color, of perspective, of experience. We see ourselves sometimes on these hard days in ways that I wish we could really turn a page on. But what I also see is you, and I want you to know that I see you, each and every one of you, who are doing the work of what I would call equity, what I would call reckoning, what I would call investing people with the rights and powers and unalienable humanity that they deserve. And what you're doing in that act is correcting, addressing, atoning, understanding, acknowledging, stepping into not only the reality, but the future that's possible for every mom, every child, every family out there. That is hard work. That is real work. Some people can talk about it. Some people can do it, and you are doing it. I so respect that. I so admire you. I feel so humbled to share some space in this universe with you, and you inspire me. I have not had easy days myself. I've had different kinds of struggles, and for those days, for those struggles, it's been important for me to know that there are spaces like Wellspring there, that there are people like you there, that there's this everlasting faith that tomorrow can be brighter and better for all of us, and that we all have to do our work to make it so. So I just want to say thank you at this moment in all that I've been through and seen, and I wanted to say thank you for all that you do for these moms and kids. You also do that for people like me who are part of your communities. I appreciate you. I love you. And thank you.
Ben, thanks a ton. This is an amazing conversation. Your commitment is not only solid, it's deep and it's longstanding, and we're grateful to you. And I'm also grateful to our audience for paying attention and listening in on this conversation, and for paying attention to Wellspring Family Services and learning how you can be involved in supporting this work as Dr. Ben and I both believe in so strongly, and we want you to.